Welcome back to GTT. Testing the chat. Chat looks like it is doing its thing. Alrighty. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about what the heck is going on with this windsurf thing. And I kind of moved the mic around so I can move my hands and do this stuff and have things out of the way. We'll see how this works. Okay. We'd watch this together. I haven't seen this. This is CNBC giving us an update on what's going on. Google snatching Windsurf CEO after this OpenAI deal dissolves. And it's more complicated than just this. There's another piece to this that's outside of Google, related to cognition, the folks that are building Devon. But let's see what CNBC has to say, and then I'll give you my take. Here we go.
Google now getting aggressive in these AI talent wars, poaching the CEO and the top talent of coding startup Windsurf right after OpenAI called off its $3 billion acquisition of that startup. Deirdre Bosa has the latest in today's Tech Check. Morning, Dee.
Hey, morning, Carl. So in the cutthroat world of AI, this was a knife twist. OpenAI lined up a $3 billion acquisition only to watch Google walk off with the talent. Now, Windsurf, as Carl mentioned, it's a buzzy AI coding startup. It was deep in acquisition talks with OpenAI. The idea was to fold its tech and user base into OpenAI's expanding app layer. But then late Friday night, Google swoops in, not with an acquisition, but another one of these pseudo acqui-hires, a $2.4 billion talent play for Windsurf's CEO and key engineers. Leading to a key question here, guys. Why did OpenAI lose this deal? I'm told by a source that Microsoft loomed large. It is, of course, OpenAI's biggest investor, but Windsurf reportedly had concerns about sharing its technology with Microsoft as part of the deal with OpenAI.
Hold on. Let's listen to this part one more time. By the way, this is wildly complicated, and as I tried to explain it, I'm probably even going to get some details wrong, but there are like many degrees of separation to explain sort of how we got here. So let's hear this last piece one more time.
But Windsurf reportedly had concerns about sharing its technology with Microsoft as part of the deal with OpenAI, especially since Microsoft's own Copilot, it directly competes in AI coding. Now, of course, Google didn't have that baggage. So now those engineers will report to...
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to maybe write a little stuff down here so I can try to capture some of these details. In particular, they're talking about how Microsoft and GitHub Copilot are sort of making this difficult. Maybe. I'm not sure. But let's keep going.
To Sundar Pichai and DeepMind, not Sam Altman. Now, this all suggests that OpenAI's entanglement with Microsoft, it's becoming more of a liability, not just as OpenAI pushes to restructure into a for-profit and raise fresh capital, but also in M&A during these cutthroat talent wars. Now, this all matters for investors because the rules of engagement in AI, they are changing. With a regulatory climate that is still unfriendly to full acquisitions by the mega caps, the path to scale isn't M&A, it's talent poaching and license deals. And that means that companies building the models and that have the infrastructure to
Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, let's keep going.
Train them, they are structurally advantaged. That is harder to disrupt, despite Trump's administration's push to help so-called little tech, the startups like the ones on the bottom of your screen here, who have all sort of sold out to big tech. So the power is shifting back to, or you could say, it is staying with the biggest players, the mega.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's just be honest for a second. While, I'm part of the startup space, and I love startups. I also work in big tech previously, and look, when you have hundreds of billions of dollars in capital and you can acquire these startups like with a small amount of change in the wind, That's how sort of inconsequential it is to you. Of course, big tech runs the space. So this idea that these small startups are just going to come in and suddenly just outperform the big tech, it's, I think, somewhat confused. It's not that it can't happen. It can, and it has, but it's very hard to displace these large incumbents, even if you have outstanding people, because of all the things that big tech can do to poach your people, poach you, uh, basically stamp you out of existence because they're going to compete directly with you and they have significantly more resources, all of that stuff. So it's never, I don't know that the landscape has ever directly sided with the startups, but I do think that startups have advantages. One of them is they can be far more nimble. They have significantly less red tape. They also can take risks and make mistakes, whereas big tech, I mean, the ramifications of big tech making a mistake, if they do something that is egregious, they could be sued for billions of dollars because they have that much money. Whereas if a small startup like Scale or Character AI, if they do something wrong, they don't even have that much money to to sue for litigation. And so the big targets principally stay these near $1 trillion companies. Or on this list, I mean, Alphabet's $1 trillion, Microsoft is $1 trillion, Amazon I think is $1 trillion, and I'm not sure about Meta. But yeah, the landscape I think is heavily tilted toward big tech.
Caps. Now, this helps explain also, guys, why Meta and Zuckerberg are spending billions of dollars to build their own models and deploy sovereign scale infrastructure. It all comes together with stories like these ones.
Yeah, I don't know about. It's strange that they keep throwing Meta into this discussion. It's not that Meta isn't competing in the general landscape of AI, but what we're talking about right now is sort of the AI coding hype wars. And some of the major players in the AI coding hype wars are Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM. Yeah, and there's probably a couple others. So it's surprising to not see IBM here because Alphabet has a variety of things from Google. Amazon, at least historically, had things like Code Whisperer and other systems. They actually have some really interesting learned systems, so machine learning systems that do a variety of things like code analysis, stuff related to their AWS infrastructure, which I think they're not driving this as much as it appears that folks like Anthropic, Google, and Microsoft are, and potentially OpenAI, but they're definitely doing stuff. I think they're just maybe keeping things on the DL. And then, of course, you have Microsoft and GitHub doing the Copilot thing. So these guys here are all sort of in this coding, this AI coding hype war. But Meta is, I don't know why Meta is here. Like, I don't know what their system is that they're building. I know that they have like Code Llama, but this is, I don't know that they have a vibe coding or code assistant system like these other guys do. So it's strange that they continue to try to pull Meta in. I know that Meta is doing stuff in the general space of AI, and they are doing their superintelligence lab, and they have Jan LeCun and other rock stars in the AI world. So sure, but AI is huge, and we're just talking about the coding space. Okay, but now let's watch this again, and then I'm going to interrupt as they talk about various things to share some insight on things that they're not mentioning but are highly relevant to this discussion. Okay, let's go through it one more time.
Google now getting aggressive in these AI talent wars, poaching the CEO and the top talent of coding startup
Okay, so the first thing is they're saying basically that this is This is Google coming in and poaching, let's say, Windsurf from OpenAI. This is one of the first arguments. And I'm going to bring this up and hope that I can. Oh, cool. This may work. Now we can. Okay, let me close this. We may get this to work after all. Yeah, I in my constant effort of small steps forward and always learning, I found a new app. This app over here, Drawpile, and it can work on Android and on PC, and it has real-time syncing, and it was super great. The problem is you have to set up these individual hosting sessions each time, and that is not a consistent stream, and so it just keeps disconnecting. So we're back to OneNote. Maybe next time we'll get it going. Okay, so what they just basically said is Google is poaching Windsurf from OpenAI. It's far more complicated than that. So the first thing we need to understand is that Windsurf basically, as I understand it, also known as, previously known as Codium. I don't believe that they make their own models. So let's say no LLM dev. This is just infrastructure. This is just like coding infra that they have. Now, when they first started building their system, as I understand it, yeah, maybe they were OpenAI, using OpenAI models, and then they switched to Anthropic, or maybe they were always on Anthropic. But what is a very important detail to this is they were relying heavily on the Claude models from Anthropic to do their coding system. When the deal was mentioned that Windsurf was going to go with OpenAI, OpenAI and Anthropic do not like each other. This is, I don't know how to say this. Okay, I know how to say this. It's like this. This will update itself in a second. So one of the important details here is Windsurf is going to be acquired by OpenAI. They're using the Claude models from Anthropic. Anthropic catches wind of this, and they basically say, you're not using our models anymore if you're joining OpenAI. So here's what's going on. Windsurf, Codium, going down the path of joining OpenAI. OpenAI and Anthropic do not love each other. Most of Anthropic's leadership are defectors from OpenAI. They have a lot of not love here. And so the first thing that came in to sabotage this deal was Anthropic coming in and saying, you can't use our Claude models anymore. And that's Anthropic's right, is that they're the ones that are creating the model, and they can decide who has access to it. And if they don't like OpenAI, then why would they allow their models to be used by a company that's getting acquired by their like arch nemesis? And this is further compounded by the fact that, again, as I was saying, this is going to get pretty wacky with the degrees of separation. This is further compounded by, I think it's Claude Code, which is one of Anthropic's embodiments for, I believe, like a coding assistant, vibe coding system. I haven't used Claude Code yet, although I hear it's pretty great. So on top of the fact that there's no love between OpenAI and Anthropic, Anthropic has its own vibe coding competitive product against Windsurf. And so now it's a double complexity. Before it was just Windsurf competing with Anthropic and their Claude Code. And maybe Anthropic is like, look, we're doing different things. And so they can use our model. We're going to use our model in a different way and we'll make money off of them. And then we'll also have our own product that makes us even more money. Okay, that kind of makes sense. But now with them joining their arch nemesis, now they would be inadvertently helping OpenAI create a competitive product of Claude Code with allowing Windsurf to use Anthropic's Claude models. That makes no sense. There's no universe where Anthropic is creating Claude Code, right? And OpenAI now has Windsurf. And both of these guys are based on the Claude models. That come from Anthropic. It makes no sense for how do I move this over, I wonder? Yeah, so anyway, it essentially makes no sense for Anthropic to allow this to continue because they would be helping one of their main competitors build a competitive product that is based off of their intellectual property in machine learning, the Claude models. So you just stamp that out. This should not be surprising to anyone. This is the first piece that as soon as this was mentioned, Anthropic came out and there was like this article on TechCrunch or several where they were saying like, look, Windsurf was saying, I can't believe Anthropic cut us off for the Claude models. And then Anthropic basically came back and said, why would we allow you to use our models to help our competitor, OpenAI, build a product that competes directly with our product? And you're leveraging our technology to compete with us. It doesn't make any sense. So no, don't do that. That's the first piece. When this piece came out, then it changed the landscape to make it challenging for Windsurf to be acquired by OpenAI, because now Windsurf would have to find other essentially large language model coding systems that they could use that they believe are on par with Claude. But sort of the general view that a lot of people have right now is the Claude models for coding assistants are quite good. Both Cursor and Windsurf, as I understand it, are using these as the underlying system, as well as the Claude Code. So that's three major systems that are all using this. And now if Windsurf is losing that competitive advantage, what value does Windsurf have? I mean, Windsurf has the infrastructure for their coding assistant thing, but without the models from these guys, where did those models come from? OpenAI? Well, they could have picked OpenAI's models. They didn't. So then this seems to imply the OpenAI models are not as good. So now what models could we use? Well, we could potentially try to get access to like the Gemini models or various other ones that might exist that people have available. I'm not entirely sure what all the options are. Yeah, and maybe they could look at, I mean, now with Grok 4, there may be a coding version of those that maybe they could consider there, or there is potentially the Llama, the Code Llama stuff that they could use from Meta, and I don't know the state of either of those. Okay, so that's the first piece that's changing the dynamic of this acquisition behind the scenes and complicating it for Windsurf. This then is leading to challenges, right? There's friction here. I'm going to draw like these I'm going to change this and say, okay, we've got friction. This is uncertainty over here. And then I'm going to draw this too as like, here's the heart. These guys have your no love over here. All right. This will update in a second. So now what happens with the acquisition? Well, Windsurf is already going down this rabbit hole, and they're probably in the spot where, given they're going down the acquisition path, that people are really leaning toward that route. So if things don't move forward with OpenAI, it's sort of like find another suitor thing rather than saying, okay, the deal's off, we'll just run separate. Now it can happen. Like I think it happened when the deal fell through when Adobe was trying to acquire Figma a couple of years ago. But it can be easy that if you start heading down the path of acquisition, that you want to kind of continue down that path. Let's see if we update it here. Yes, you can see my little heart now, and there's tension here. Okay, so now we're going to go back to this, and given this information that we have on the background of what's going on with Windsurf and OpenAI, now let's re-listen to the dialogue about Google. This is actually super important.
These AI talent wars, poaching the CEO and the top talent of coding startup Windsurf right after OpenAI called off its $3 billion acquisition of that startup. Drew DeBosa has the latest in today's Tech Check. Morning, D.
No, he said that OpenAI called off the deal. That's just somebody saying words, right? Was it OpenAI that called off the deal? Could it have been Windsurf that called off the deal? Right? Like it could have been mutual. We don't know. All we know is that the actual deal didn't move forward. It started to move forward in another way, and it moved forward with Google. So the question is, why would it move forward with Google? How does that actually make sense? Well, it makes a lot of sense. The first piece is, if we look at Google and Amazon, these guys actually have some reasonable amount of love with Anthropic. And you know this because of historical investments that Google and Amazon have made with Anthropic. So let's take a look at this. Google and Amazon investment in Anthropic. All right. Amazon's $8 billion investment in Anthropic or something, $4 billion, blah, blah, blah. And here we go. Both Amazon and Google have made significant investments in the AI startup Anthropic. Amazon has invested a total of $8 billion, including an additional $4 billion, blah, blah, blah. Google has committed up to $2 billion with an initial $500 million cash infusion and further, blah, blah. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, this means that Google are friends with Anthropic. Anthropic are the ones that make the Claude models. So now, if Windsurf wants to continue to use the Claude models because it's essential to their system, which it sounds like it probably is, who could they get acquired by that would kind of keep Anthropic from banning their use of this model? Google or Amazon, because those investments in Anthropic give them some amount of control and friendliness with Anthropic. So now if Windsurf wants to potentially continue their system using the Claude models and they're acquired by Google, who's made this investment, they likely have influence now to hold Anthropic accountable to giving them their access to their model. They couldn't do this with OpenAI because OpenAI doesn't have control over Anthropic, but Google and Amazon do because of that investment. So I don't know if they're on the board, if they're board observers, whatever. They have some amount of stake in Anthropic, and so Anthropic is not likely that they're going to say, "Hey, I know you're an investor and you want us to grow, but these folks from your corporation that want to use our stuff are competing with us. We're not going to give you access." Nah, they're gonna be friends and they're gonna try to work some stuff out, right? Because they're all sort of a little bit on the same team. And keep in mind, teams are forming here. Alliances are happening behind the scenes, which should be somewhat clear. It used to be this case where Team 1 was OpenAI, Microsoft, and GitHub. This is kind of team number 1. OpenAI, Microsoft, and GitHub. And then another team is team number 2 is like team number 2, once this updates, could potentially be something like Meta, IBM, Merly. Oh, and there's probably no, go away. Maybe Hugging Faces over here. All right. That's potentially team 2. And then maybe you have team 3, which is, this is where things start to get really, really murky, is you might have team 3 that is Anthropic plus Google plus DeepMind. And I know what some of you are thinking, which is Goju, Google owns DeepMind, so why are you listing them? Well, Microsoft owns GitHub as well. But just because they own them doesn't mean that they are all one entity. And as I understand it, there is a lot of tension and there's strong sort of siloing, at least historically there's been, between DeepMind and Google. And sort of like who's in charge. It's you've got a lot of chefs. You have a lot of chefs at Google. You have a lot of chefs at DeepMind related to machine learning. Not all chefs get along. And who's the best? I don't know. So there's definitely 2 large groupings of AI stuff at Google. Yeah. And on top of that, because of the investment that Google has made with Anthropic could be seen in a similar way to like Microsoft and OpenAI. Now, I think Microsoft has invested more billions in OpenAI, and Google and Amazon. So you could potentially also have Amazon here. Again, this is where it gets like really murky because there is some investment overlap here, but I don't know that Google and Amazon are necessarily on the same team. They're sort of too big in some sense to be on their own team. It feels like Amazon is maybe on Team 4 or something. But you can see how this is getting a little murky because the investments that are happening from Anthropic are they're capturing the attention of both Google and Amazon, which, by the way, in some sense is brilliant on Anthropic's part, but it muddies the water quite a bit because who really is sort of the leader, the big tech leader in the Anthropic space? It's not super clear. For example, with OpenAI, it's very clear that it's Microsoft, and with, like, let's say with Merle, it's very clear that our binding, at least right now, is much more with IBM than anyone else. Yeah. And the reason why I have Meta over here is Meta and IBM are aligned in this open source consortium for AI. These folks over here are a little bit heavy into the open source space. These folks here are a little bit more heavy into closed source. There is some open source. And then these folks, again, it's a little bit of both. There's open sourceness, there's closed sourceness. And then Team 4, I don't know what Team 4 is. But there are more teams. Now, we were talking about the challenges that Windsurf would have being on Team 1, right? Windsurf gets acquired by OpenAI, then you have Microsoft and GitHub. Well, absolutely, right? Because now you have Windsurf. Let's just hypothesize if you had Windsurf over here with OpenAI and Microsoft and GitHub, which is it? Is it the Windsurf coding system, or is it GitHub Copilot? And keep in mind, GitHub Copilot was using OpenAI's models, and Microsoft was sort of just keeping the two together. So the theory was at the highest level that OpenAI is building the model. GPT 3.5, I think, is where they started, and they changed it to Codex or something like that. And Microsoft is the controlling party of both this, like the king, and these are princes and princesses, OpenAI and GitHub. And so GitHub supplies the data in all the repos that you train on. OpenAI provides the model, and Microsoft is the connecting glue. So now you have GitHub Copilot come out, and then you have OpenAI coming in and saying, we're going to acquire Windsurf. And then it's like, what's going on here? We're going to have two systems that are competing head to head. Now, part of what I think is happening here is OpenAI is really good at burning bridges with people. It seems. It seems is probably an understatement. There's lots of data that I think demonstrates this. And so you have another thing where some loss of love is happening. You've got another heart that is being broken because there's tension growing between OpenAI and Microsoft. And if that's not clear, I strongly recommend you check it out and see that breakdown. This is super important because as this relationship dissolves, what happens to GitHub Copilot? Are they going to switch into other models? Now, Microsoft can do its own language models, and in fact, I think that they're doing that, and I think they're getting more and more frustrated with OpenAI, and I have lots of thoughts about that. My general take is OpenAI is doing a really good job of being the architects of their own destruction. They literally are architecting the full eradication of their company with things like this, right? Is because they created such hostility with Anthropic, then the Windsurf deal is likely not going to go through because Anthropic is not going to stand for Windsurf using their models if OpenAI acquires them. So that gets killed. On top of that, OpenAI is destroying the relationship that they have with Microsoft because they're like two cool for school or something, and they forget that, like, sure, you guys talk good talk. These guys actually make money in perpetuity. They have, like, for decades made billions and billions of dollars and are positive cash flow. They're like on the right side of the revenue line, where they're in the black rather than in the red, which means basically that they can build products, they can throw lots of money at this, and they don't necessarily need to scrounge up a whole bunch of investment money and kind of cross their fingers that they'll be able to build something that is going to generate positive cash flow. And keep in mind, like, just generating revenue is easy. Generating profit is hard. And what I'm talking about here is it's very easy for OpenAI to spend billions of dollars to stand up this infrastructure and build their different GPT models and burn billions and billions of dollars, as they have, in standing these things up, and then charging like $20 a month for the consumer or whatever, and then build maybe some enterprise relationships with big tech. And then what they can do for their investors is they can show that the traction is so large that don't focus on their revenue, don't focus on the revenue amount, focus on the traction. Is that what they'll do is they'll land and expand and then demand, which is, you know, you land in a space, you expand to take it over, and then you demand more money. It's sort of like the Uber model. Is they came in, they cut the bottom out of the cost for ride sharing taxis, essentially, and made it significantly less expensive and more convenient. And so why would you use taxis? And then once they had everybody basically using Ubers as much as they could, then they quietly and intentionally increased the price to where now Ubers tend to be more expensive, quite a bit more expensive than cabs. Why do people keep using Ubers? It's the convenience. You already have the app, you already have the account, your credit card's in there. All you have to do is just click the button. And so just do that. Whereas with the cab, like, you got to call somebody, it changes everywhere you are. This is the whole land and expand and demand type of model. It's the same thing that OpenAI is essentially trying to do, and many of these folks are trying to do, is that you don't need to show that you're actually generating profit. You just need to show that you can generate some amount of revenue, but the traction is really strong. So go for large amounts of quantity of people using your stuff, and then convince your investors to invest the billions, and that, yes, you're on the negative side, you're on the red side of the profit right now, but you'll do the price jacking once you get everybody locked, and then everything's going to be great. And you can see OpenAI is already doing that. They're saying they're going to charge like $10,000 for a full year subscription or something to like their PhD level, their super intelligent models or something. That's significantly more, like a jump from $10,000 a year, which I think is what they were looking at charging. Let's actually look this up. So it's like, what is the cost of OpenAI's PhD model? What's the cost of OpenAI's PhD model for the year? Oh my gosh. Okay, it was way more than what I thought. Sorry. I thought it was like $10,000 for the year. It's $20,000 per month. So it's $240,000 for the year. Okay, that's significantly more than like what I pay for Gemini Pro, which is $20 a month or something. All right. So this is the idea of the whole land, expand, demand. Is OpenAI believes that they have landed, they have expanded, and they probably have, and now they can price jack because they already got everybody like set up. They already have the account. People are using it, or they were. And so now you just like slowly turn the heat up. This works, I think, if you really have market dominance. But the problem is OpenAI doesn't. And I think they're losing more and more of market dominance kind of like every day, because their technology, at least based on what I understand, is not notably disruptive. That they were principally just like throwing a lot of money at something and brute forcing it, right? Like they didn't invent transformers. Google Brain did that. They were one of the first, I want to give credit where credit's due. They were one of the first companies to deploy large language models in production quality systems that had easy to use user interfaces, which is why I think they took the world by storm in Q3, Q4 of like 2022, right? When ChatGPT first came out and everybody was kind of like losing their mind. They were in a really strong market position from at that point, and things I think maybe they climbed a little bit through 2023, but I think since then they've been slowly or maybe largely on the decline. Okay, so this is a little bit more background just to get at the point that this guy's talking about Google poaching. Hey, Ivan, you missed the fact that we're doing this essentially deep dive to try to understand what's going on with the Windsurf deal and how it happened. And so we watched this. Essentially, we watched this CNBC video, super short video, which describes the details, but it's doing it in a very sort of skin deep, superficial analysis. And I'm doing a deeper dive explaining the complexities of why Windsurf going with OpenAI is not a great deal, why it may have fallen apart, and why Google makes more sense for Windsurf. Now, keep in mind, all Google acquired, as I understand it, is just a lot of the C-suite folks from Windsurf. A large majority of the team outside of the C-suite folks, including maybe even the IP of the company, went to Cognition. Okay, so to add more complexity to this whole story, when we look at how Windsurf was sort of divided up, is it sort of looked a little bit like this. You have Windsurf, and you have, like, let's say it's C-suite to Google, and then you basically had the not C-suite, which is sort of everything else, the many of the employees, as well as many of the employees, as well as maybe the IP. Maybe like these, when I'm talking about IP, is the intellectual property from the technology that they're building. Now, keep in mind, Windsurf, as I understand it, the IP that they would have would be just in maybe the infrastructure that they're building for their vibe coding system. And that infrastructure stuff, I mean, I'm sure it's cool, but a lot of the novelty of these systems are the novelty around the machine learning or machine programming technology that resides under the sort of the front level, the front facing thing. So for example, with Cursor, although Cursor I hear is doing a really good job with the user interface and making it reduce friction, the underlying novelty for the model is coming from Anthropic. It's Claude. So does Cursor have a lot of technological moat in terms of their IP with that infrastructure for their application? Maybe, but based on my understanding of artificial intelligence, machine learning, working in the space for like 20 years, as well as machine programming and software, I would argue probably not. That it's sort of like, does GitHub have a lot of novelty in their, or did they have a lot of novelty when they first were standing themselves up? Well, maybe, but that wasn't really the point. The point was Git is super powerful, but very hard to use and not great user interface. GitHub comes in and basically slaps a UI on Git. I mean, it's more complicated than that, obviously. And they did a really good job SaaSing this and making it scale. These are not easy problems for sure. But admittedly, the star of the show is Git. Git is what makes all the magic happen. Git is the engine, unlike Hey, buddy. Hi, Alvi. Uh, good to have you here. And hello, Bangladesh from Northern California. And also, um, Ivan is, I think, in East Europe. Is that right, Ivan? Maybe you can drop in where you're coming from. Anyway, so as far as Windsurf's acquisition, you've got the C-suite going to Google, and then not C-suite going to Cognition. And Slovenia. Okay, awesome. Yeah. So we've got a pretty interesting distribution, at least for the three of us that are talking. I suspect there's lurkers in the background. Okay, so there's the split of Windsurf is that OpenAI deal falls through. So then it breaks down to the C-suite is going to go to Google. And as I understand it, they're joining their main group that's absorbing them is essentially DeepMind. That's what I heard. Someone will have to fact check me and see if this is actually the case, but it sounds like the C-suite from Windsurf is joining DeepMind. It kind of makes sense that they would do that. And then we can extend what Google's doing with the Windsurf C-suite and make it better. Now, I want to pause here real quick because I think this is a very interesting point related to what we were talking about with the video that we saw from CNBC that was talking about how vibe coding systems are like taking big tech by storm. And we saw that Google said 50% of all their code is being written by AI. So let me just throw this question out. We talked about how I think that number is massively exaggerated, that there's no way 50% of Google's code is being written by these systems because they're producing like really low fidelity code. And it feels like it's a massive exaggeration. Now, let me ask you, if Google is really killing it and they have 50% of their code being written by AIs, why on earth then do they need the Windsurf team to help them with these coding assistants? I mean, it sounds like they already have it in the bag. So why do you need Windsurf? Like you already have, I mean, 50% of all your stuff, you're clearly dominating. So you don't need any help. Or maybe you do. And maybe you do because you don't have 50% of the code written by AI. You know it's fabricated. We all know it's fabricated. So stop lying. Just tell the truth, right? It's like 5%. And that's okay because the truth is most of software development is not writing code. It's doing other things. Okay, so stop misleading people. You guys are big tech. You're burning a lot of trust with the community, and eventually, if you keep doing this, it's going to backfire on you. Very similar to how it's like backfired on OpenAI. There's very few people that I think positively about OpenAI now because Sam Altman has done so many disingenuous things that are bordering on bad actor related stuff that you just lose trust, you lose faith, you lose confidence. And yeah, so basically Alphabet, stop doing that. Amazon, stop doing it. Microsoft, stop doing it. Meta, I don't know, but we saw the graph in the last video. All those numbers were basically, and Meta was the only one that I felt like wasn't exaggerated because Meta was speculating that they might get to 50% by this time next year. And then they basically said nothing about where they are right now. I think that's probably the most honest answer I've heard. And why does this matter? It matters because when you are selling a bill of goods, when you're promoting a lie that is grand and everyone else is doing it, it becomes a emperor's new clothing thing. So what happens is everybody starts believing what you're saying is true. And then everybody else has to level up to try to look as impressive. And then what happens is eventually the lies are so grand they're so disconnected from reality that like there's no trust at all. It's not even it's not even close to being what the objective reality of the situation is. And because of that, now no one believes you. They don't believe the things that you're going to say because you've been lying to them for so long. And then they find out, oh, actually, what you have is 1/100th of what you've been saying. Like, think about this for a second. Is they're saying, oh, check this out. Our revenue is $1 billion. And then it turns out the revenue is $1 million. That's a little bit of a different number, guys. They're not like, they start with a different letter. That's how big of a number difference it is. 3 orders of magnitude is not something to like sneeze at. So don't be that far off. Like, you can be 10% off. So you're not doing 50%, you're doing more like 5%. You could say 6%. It's like, okay, well, close enough. But when you start becoming that far off, people, again, people are gullible. People are not necessarily dumb. And this is why I think there's a lot of pushback on the vibe coding hype wave. Is people are like furious, mostly because it's just largely disingenuous. It's just not the state of what's actually happening. And then what happens is, because the companies are overselling it so much, the public becomes massively resentful and they swing the pendulum way over here. And now we're not making any forward progress because these guys are so annoyed by these guys' lies. These guys need these guys to be using this stuff to actually make forward progress. And we are stalemate. We're stalemated out. What we need is people to just be responsible, and then both sides can come in, and then we can actually make forward progress. This is why, like, I'm continuing to vibe code out, is to try to find ways to show that, like, okay, look, you can build tools and cool things with vibe coding, and using stochastic language models that are going to behave unpredictably can be okay if you're building like a rapid prototype and a toy program. Like, this is the Goju Tech Talk thumbnail generator. It is very much a toy app. This is not a production system, but I'm using it actually for all these episodes. Speaking of which, I used it for the background for this episode. So when I changed this from stream and up level it, I'm going to use one of these photos. And the one I'm going to use is this one. And this has a hidden meaning related to what's going on with the Windsurf deal. And if you look at the prompt that I gave it, if it still has it here we go. Draw an image that visually explains the startup acquisition of Windsurf between OpenAI, Google, and Cognition. Okay, here's my interpretation of this art that my thumbnail generator created. This is Windsurf. They're the ones that's getting acquired. They're being split in two. All right. We'll make this one. We'll make this one Google. So Google's getting a good portion of it. We'll make this one Cognition. Cognition is getting some portion. I'm having the Cognition be these guys because they were telling an interesting story when they were first promoting Devon, which was a little bit disconnected from reality. So I feel like they're a little bit darker. They deserve to be a little bit like are they good guys or not good guys? So anyway, here's Windsurf. They're being kind of split apart, these two guys. And here's OpenAI. OpenAI was initially at this, and now they're not involved. So they're not getting a piece of this. And that's so here, one more time. This is Windsurf. This is Google. This is Cognition. This is OpenAI. And my little vibe coded thing took this. Now, whether or not it actually knew that was what's happening, I don't know. It didn't get all the images right, but it got one of them right, one that I'm going to use. And what I think is super great is this has value. It clearly has value for me. I'm using it in a production system, but it's not one of the production pieces. It is a toy piece related to, it's like one small piece of this entire sphere. And the key element here, the key sort of production piece, is the content for GTT. That's being done by me and deterministic systems, but these stochastic AI systems can handle, especially the vibe coding things, they can handle things that are not like the main character, but like kind of the NPCs, the stuff that's around it. And you tend to need, whenever you're building a large production system, you tend to need a flurry of ancillary pieces that support the main character. Kind of think of it as like you're in a role-playing game and you're the main character, but you don't go run the dungeon just by yourself. You have your team, right? And maybe some of them are a little bit disposable, but don't lose the cleric, right? And so that's what these types of systems are, is like they're the supporting party. The main character, for example, in this case, is the GTT content, but you're going to have things like this, like the thumbnail generator or the shorts generator. All of the stuff could be vibe coded, and you could do it really fast, and it doesn't need to have the same production quality level as like the main systems that we rely on in YouTube, right, for this content. But I think it, at least for me, it's a strong demonstration that vibe coding does have value if used in the right context. And then you have to understand that this is throwaway code. This is not good code. Right? Like all of this CSS stuff and JSON stuff, it's embedded in a single file. The actual code itself is like, this is just atrocious. All of these buttons and stuff, like the layout of this is just, it's just a nonsensical spaghetti code. I'd never let code like this fly into like our production quality systems. And I don't think any of the senior developers at Merly would allow this. However, again, as a rapid prototype in a toy, it's totally fine. This is not going to be a production quality system. It's never going to be released as a public interfacing thing, but we can use it behind the scenes internally to generate thumbnails for GTT. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll continue to chip away at it. And then maybe one day, if we need it to be super hardened, we'll rewrite the whole thing and we'll just use this as like scaffolding or like the explanation code. Okay, let me take a second look at the chat. So Ivan's saying, what I can't understand is how this fits with the current workflow. Like you need to have standards and processes to define how code gets released. The tooling so far looks like it's 100% buy-in. Yeah, I could talk in, I think, significant detail about that, Ivan. And then his second comment is, meaning you'd have to change processes and completely change the way the company works. This sounds like insanity. Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Like if you were to use these as part of the actual workflow for engineering, the whole system is likely going to break down in a variety of ways, because you wouldn't look at code. If you were trying to integrate this into production systems, you would be looking at the code and the systems in a very different way. Okay, what is going on here? Like, okay, dismiss, just go away for forever. All right. Yeah, vibe coding editors, etc. Yes, absolutely. So you have vibe coding editors. Then, like, what do code reviews look like? Because code reviews right now, it generally is the expectation that people maybe aren't awful when they're putting code together. Like it'll be peer reviewed before it gets into the actual pull requests and stuff. With vibe coding stuff, one of the big challenges is if you have a junior developer, right, that vibe coded their way into the system, it could be that they have this and they're like, well, it sort of works. And then they say, okay, I need to check this in. And so they go to check it in, and some senior developer looks at this and says, yeah, this code is garbage. Rewrite the whole thing and then give it back to me. The junior developer at that point may say, I didn't write this code, so I don't even know, like, what to fix, like what makes it bad. And the senior developer knows, but are they going to take the time and be like, well, all this data stuff should be in a separate file. You should have various JSON things. You should abstract the interfaces so it doesn't work just with Gemini, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's like a huge, this is an entire redesign. This isn't like a code review where you're like, oh, this button, you know, could you call this generate image button and just use the whole word button? Like that's what a lot of code reviews look like today. If the code is really strong, it's that the senior developers that are doing the code reviews will kind of feel this obligation like, well, I need to find something. There needs to be something in here that I can try to improve. And then they'll be like, oh, this variable name, right? And then you won't even consider the larger design because you'll just assume, well, they probably got it right. And when humans are writing this, I think that it could very well be the case if you have the hierarchy of training that you get to the point to where your senior developers know how to design stuff, right? Like Ivan, for example, senior developer at Merly. And so there's a lot of trust that he just knows what he's doing. And so he's going to get the general design. And we may look at the finer details, but the whole overarching system, we're not necessarily going to challenge that he has designed it the right way. Also, the design of software systems are not inherently obvious when you look at the code. You have to translate the code from a textual representation into diagrams that show you how these pieces interact with each other. And it's not straightforward to do this just by looking at the code. And even automated systems that try to do this really struggle, like reverse UML, Unified Modeling Language, or whatever it stands for, can struggle with this because even UML would just construct maybe the classes, but understanding the interaction between the classes and sort of the instances that are going to be constructed from the classes, these are all things that are not super obvious directly by looking at the code, right? You really need someone that is a senior architect to design that in some sort of visual representation first. And then after that design is laid out, then we code it. With the vibe coding systems, that's not how it works. Like with this system, I didn't come up with a design. I just said, all right, we're going to build a thumbnail generator. And the thumbnail generator is like, okay, here's what I want it to do. I'm not even telling it how it's designed. I don't know. You figure it out. I'm just going to tell you what this is supposed to do. And as long as it does what it's supposed to do, then we're good. So it does what it's supposed to do, right? That's super great. Like I can press this button and it'll continue to like generate new images based on this meta prompt and the specific prompt and all that stuff. Like that's super great. But the system just working is generally not sufficient for production quality systems. It's not all that, right? Because just working only in the space of like, whoa, look at this. It's even, it's like given, Windsurf, it's got like the surfboard. Yeah, I mean, this is getting pretty interesting, right? Like it's kind of leveling itself up a little bit as we go through. And keep in mind, what's interesting about this too, the prompt has not changed. It's the same prompt for all, for both of these. Okay, I need to take a short pause. So stand by, I'll be back in just 2 minutes. We are back. So now, let's watch this one more time so we can have a full recoverage of what they have to say and see if all the pieces that we've assembled kind of make sense. Let's take one more look at these cool little drawings. So this one isn't totally getting it right. I think this is supposed to be cognition over here. So it's got OpenAI. Oh, Google, I guess, is left. I suspect this is still Windsurf, and that's cool because it's got like the surfboard. I kind of dig it. Similar thing here. Okay, here now we have Google. That's cool. We have OpenAI, and then we have Windsurf, and it looks like cognition is on the back. That's actually that's not a bad interpretation, actually. And now, yeah, it's getting pretty interesting. Cool. Yeah. All right. Let's watch this one more time. And where are we? Want to be this one. All right. Here we go. Let's see if this now matches all the things that we just discussed.
In these AI talent wars, poaching the CEO and the top talent of coding startup Windsurf right after OpenAI called off its $3 billion acquisition of that startup. Deirdre Bosa has the latest in today's Tech Check. Morning, Dee.
Hey, morning, Carl. So in the cutthroat world of AI, this was a knife twist. OpenAI lined up a $3 billion acquisition only to watch Google walk off with the talent.
So I mean, again, I don't know that we know how this all went down, or at least I don't know all the details. I just know sort of the outcome. And so calling this like a dagger knife twist, it could very well be that OpenAI and Windsurf both just realized this is not going to work if Anthropic isn't going to give you access to the models. And so they both agreed to like see if there's other ways to do this. And then actually approached Google to see if Google would be amenable to it, right? Like, so I think this could very well be legacy media putting sensational spins on these things when, like, it's unfortunate because we want to know that we can rely on them to tell us the truth without hyperbole, but they're as responsible for the AI hype because they say things like this, is that they're inventing a narrative around a factual story. So the factual story is that Google has acquired the C-suite staff of Windsurf, and they're joining DeepMind, I think. But that's essentially all we know. We don't know how this transpired, whose idea was all of this, and then we know that the non-C-suite folks and potentially Windsurf's IP went to Cognition. That's it. And so we don't know if people were happy, if they're sad, if there's a whole bunch of friends, a bunch of enemies. All of that is just speculatory in nature. So we just shouldn't do it. We can draw what the pictures are in terms of the relationships that we know exist. So it gives a better sense to people on like how this transpired and how OpenAI, they're not good friends with Anthropic, which would cause Anthropic to basically withdraw Windsurf from being able to use their models because they'd compete directly with Claude Code, and they don't want to help OpenAI, which then could potentially lead to Google or Amazon to come in and acquire them so they could keep using the Anthropic models because both those companies invested in Anthropic, right? That's all just facts. There's no opinion. There's no additional I'm inventing a narrative of like, oh yeah, and secretly this person at OpenAI sabotaged this deal, and then what, like, I don't know those details. So let's not introduce some additional salacious narrative just to try to get more views. CNBC, just stick to the facts, guys. Stick to the facts.
Now, Windsurf, as Carl mentioned, it's a buzzy AI coding startup. It was deep in acquisition talks with OpenAI. The idea was to fold its tech and user base into OpenAI's expanding app layer. But then, late Friday night, Google swoops in, not with an acquisition, but another one of these pseudo-acqui-hires, a $2.4 billion talent play for Windsurf's CEO and key engineers, leading to a key question here, guys.
Acqui-hires are acquisitions. Okay, they're still acquisitions. The difference is that you're acquiring for the talent rather than the technology, but it's still an acquisition. It functions like an acquisition, all right? The parameters in many cases are very much the same. They're sort of the same that you would do for the deals on the way the employees that are coming from the acquired company would come in and have like certain vesting periods. All of that stuff, it's basically all the same. The only key difference is that you might not have any parameters in that acquisition that are related to the technology or the intellectual property. That basically the acquisition is principally about the talent. But it's still an acquisition. It's called an acqui-hire, right? Acquisition for the purposes of hiring.
Why did OpenAI lose this deal? I'm told by a source that Microsoft loomed large. It is, of course, OpenAI's biggest investor, but Windsurf reportedly had concerns about sharing its technology with Microsoft as part of the deal with OpenAI.
Yeah, I don't believe that. I fundamentally do not believe that Windsurf had issues sharing its technology with Microsoft. Like what technology? The UI technology, like their JavaScript code, they're not building the models. So what technology are you talking about that Microsoft might possibly not have? That it logically doesn't make sense. That Windsurf, as best I understood, their actual IP was just in the infrastructure, which is part of the reason why Google's acquisition was just on the hires, not the technology, because they just don't care. They're like, there's nothing here of substance that we don't already have. And if Google is passing on the IP, Microsoft would probably do the same thing. So it doesn't make sense that Windsurf would be concerned that Microsoft would have access to the IP. Nobody cares about the IP because they don't have a technological moat. If they did, the acquisition from Google would be more than just the acqui-hire. It would also be the technology and the IP. But they passed on that, and then they gave it to Cognition. Why? Because it probably, in Google's mind, as well as probably Microsoft, it's irrelevant. It's nothing. Whereas for Cognition, it kind of makes sense that they would want it because it's code that they don't have. It's infrastructure code that they would have to write themselves, and Windsurf has it. So they can just use that production quality code to help essentially ramp the systems that they're building. With Google and Microsoft, they have the infrastructure code already, right? They have things like Visual Code, which is like fundamental for a bunch of these things. They have Visual Studio, and then Google will have its stuff too. So you can see how, again, there's a reality, there's the objective reality of what's going on, and then there's sort of like, again, even with legacy media reporting on this, there's some unusual things that are being introduced that are a bit tangential to the truthfulness or the truthiness of this story. Yeah. So just, we have to like keep our thinking caps on the whole time while we listen to this, which is a bit unfortunate, right? I actually think, just as a side rant, I think this is part of the reason why a lot of people are moving away from legacy media, and they're finding their news sources in places like Asmongold or Goju Tech Talk or Flossie Carter or Linus Tech Tips or things like that, because they are finding that these people, individual people, are highly trustworthy and they're domain experts. And so just trust them, because they're not trying to sell you like a bill of goods. They are trying to, I mean, it's not to say that they couldn't, there could be some disingenuousness in there, but the ones that I mentioned, I watch all three of those, and I basically, what I find is they tend to be very factual. They tend to give it to you very much straight with almost no hype or just sort of exaggerated truths. And I think that that's part of the reason why legacy media is sort of on its way out. Is I think that there's too much corruption in the way that they're telling the stories. There's too much focus on sensation and making it salacious. And then also there's space where they're partnering with the people that they're reporting on, and there's kickbacks to make the narrative be told in a particular way, which is obscuring the truthfulness of the stories that we're getting. And again, people are gullible, they're not dumb. They know that, like, well, this just doesn't sound true. CNBC. Are you sure Google has 50% of their code being written by AI? And after they say this and they promote sort of this misleading information, I think people eventually kind of get fed up. It's just like, I'm not going to listen to this anymore because it's just such nonsense. Anyone with a brain would get that. I'm going to go find my news elsewhere. And yeah, so that's kind of what I've done is I use sort of like I think it's ground news. Ground news, I think, is one of the things I use. Ground news app. Ground news is this? Yeah. Yeah, this guy. And what they do is they basically do a collation of a whole bunch of news outlets, news sources reporting on the same story, and then they try to do verification of its truthfulness and what kind of bias it has. So you go in knowing, okay, 35 news outlets reported on this. They're all reporting very similar things. These guys have a slant to the right, these guys to the left, these guys to the center. And then when you see that, like, okay, there are 40 people all reporting on the same thing, is probably true. Or at least the higher order thing is true. Now, the details, they're probably going to be some murkiness, but I probably can believe now this actually happened, right? So anyway, if you aren't already using Ground News, strongly recommend it. It's basically my primary form of news now. Because by the time I get the article, it's like I just say, okay, 35 outlets are all reporting on this. So the details may be slightly different, but I have a strong sense that this is actually true. That Google did actually do an acqui-hire of Windsurf's C-suite, and then Cognition did the acquisition of the rest of the company. Okay, back to this.
OpenAI, especially since Microsoft's own Copilot, it directly competes in AI coding. Now, of course, Google didn't have that baggage, so now those engineers will report to Sundar.
What? So they're trying to argue that this deal didn't go through because Microsoft has GitHub Copilot, which they do, but Google doesn't have a competing product. What are you talking about? Google absolutely does. If you look at the news on what Google's doing, I mean, I'm vibing with Gemini Pro, and they have, I think it's like Google Code or something. They've got numerous products that are competing with Copilot. So they absolutely do have this. That's not at all what I think is going on under the hood.
Of course, Google didn't have that baggage. So now those engineers will report to Sundar Pichai and DeepMind, not Sam Altman. Now this all.
That part I think is somewhat true. Is I do think that they're reporting into DeepMind.
Suggests that OpenAI's entanglement with Microsoft, it's becoming more of a liability, not just as OpenAI pushes to restructure into a for-profit and raise fresh capital, but also in M&A during these cutthroat talent wars. Now, this all matters for investors because the rules of engagement in AI, they are changing. With a regulatory climate that is still unfriendly to full acquisitions by the mega caps, the path to scale.
Some of these things that she's saying, I don't understand. And she's not giving enough context to explain what it means, the things she's saying. Instead, she's just sort of saying some words, which again is unfortunate. But one of those, and I'm not trying to pick on her, this is just a general thing. But one of the things she mentions, and we'll listen to this again, is she's talking about how the rules of engagement have changed for the AI tech wars. Okay, how? What's changed? Because I don't think that it's changed at all. I think it's the same old, same old. Nothing's changed. It's just the hot topic is now this. It's the same rules of engagement, right? War is still war. It's just what you're warring about. And so before it was basically the language model wars, and now we're getting into the AI coding assistant hype wars. But let's listen to this one more time so we can hear what she's talking about. And you can kind of get a sense of like, oh, this is not like fully baked.
Of engagement in AI. in M&A during these cutthroat talent wars. Now, this all matters for investors because the rules of engagement in AI, they are changing.
The rules of engagement in AI, they are changing. How? I mean, if they are changing, tell us how. Like, what was the old way and what is the new way?
With a regulatory climate that is still unfriendly to full acquisitions by the mega caps, the path to scale isn't M&A, it's talent poaching and license.
Talent poaching, which is separate from acquisitions, is like what Meta is doing with OpenAI, and talent poaching has been going on for decades, especially in Silicon Valley. It's never stopped. It's constantly what happens, and you have people that are hoppers that are just trying to take minor levels up, and they do this game where they dance back and forth between Meta and Google and Amazon and blah blah, and that is like an example of the talent poaching stuff. So Meta stealing from OpenAI, Anthropic stealing from OpenAI, OpenAI stealing from Google, that kind of thing. The acquisition stuff is just the normal acquisition stuff. It's acquisition plus acqui-hire, and it's essentially talent poaching, but it's just at a larger scale. Is that rather than poaching from the company, you just take the whole company. So rather than going in and being like, I'm going to take 2 of the eggs from this basket, you're just saying, I'm just going to take the whole basket. It's just talent poaching, maybe at a larger scale.
Deals. And that means that companies building the models and that have the infrastructure to train them, they are structurally advantaged. That is harder to disrupt, despite Trump's administration's push to help so-called little tech, the startups like the ones on the bottom of your screen here, who have all sort of sold out to big tech. So
we haven't all sold out to big tech. Some of us have, not all of us have.
Power is shifting back to, or you could say it is staying with, the biggest players, the mega caps. Now, this helps explain also, guys, why Meta and Zuckerberg are spending billions of dollars to build their own models and deploy sovereign scale infrastructure. It all comes together with stories like these ones. And
cool. So, yeah, I mean, I like CNBC, and I think it's Deidre. I think she does a pretty good job explaining these things. I think they missed the mark a little bit, but overall it's sort of capturing a little bit of the high level story, but hopefully with these additional pieces, so you can see that there's actually a lot of degrees of separation on how this actually unfolded. And as we go deeper down these rabbit holes, the relationships between these different megacorps and startups influence the way the teams and the competitive landscape emerges, right? So, for example, Merly is part of this story over here because we are connected with IBM. And because IBM is connected with Meta in the open source space, Merly has some sort of tangential connection with Meta as well as Hugging Face, because Hugging Face is also supported here by IBM. Likewise, over on like Team 3 here, you have Anthropic, DeepMind, Google, and Amazon. Why? Because Google and Amazon have funded Anthropic, and so they're not actually a team. They're all fighting each other, but are they? It's very strange, and it's very murky. Similar, like with OpenAI, Microsoft, and GitHub all being on the same team, and you can see that this love affair that existed just a couple of years ago, there's a real good chance that these parents are getting divorced in a major way. And I fully anticipate that this is going to happen. I just don't know, I think, when and like the degree of the fallout. But it's clear to me that the sort of puppy dogs and rainbows relationship that used to exist between OpenAI and Microsoft, that is yesteryear. That is yesterday. That today and the future, I think it's going to be a very different landscape. So, excellent. I think that's it for today. I had a good time dissecting this, and now we have a little bit more understanding of how this has played out, I'm not sure that this matters too much in the grand scheme of things. I think it probably is helping cognition the most. That's my speculation, because they are getting more. They're getting maybe the non C-suite machine programming folks, which is probably very cool for them, given that getting talent that's on the level of the Windsurf folks is probably not super easy. So that's probably a big win. On top of that, they're getting a lot of infrastructure code that they probably needed. So out of this whole deal, my speculation is cognition is probably winning the most. I do think that it's interesting that Google is absorbing the whole C-suite from Windsurf. And this is, again, very strange to me if you consider Google is saying that we're already super advanced with our AI coding systems. Because if they were that advanced, right? Like if they were really doing 50% of their code with these systems, why do they need the Windsurf folks? Why do you need that? Like, for example, if you're Meta and you're doing deep learning and you have Jan LeCun, why do you need like Gary Marcus, or why do you need Jeff Hinton or something? You don't. And that's why you generally don't have Jan LeCun and Jeff Hinton and Joshua Bengio all at the same company. Instead, you have like Hinton over at Google, or he was, and then you have LeCun over at Meta, and you have Bengio, or at least I think Sam Bengio at like Apple, right? All different places, all heavyweights, but they don't all gravitate to the same place because you don't need three of maybe the same chefs. So this actually demonstrates something quite counterintuitive to me. It demonstrates to me that Google is not nearly as far along in their coding assistants as they claim to be, because if they were, this acquisition, especially the C-suite going to DeepMind, doesn't happen. They just don't need it. So like we anticipated, like we were speculating before, those numbers I think are exaggerated, and I think they do need it. I think they actually are a bit further behind than they would like to be. So anyway, thanks everybody. This has been a lot of fun. Appreciate all of you joining, and hope you have a great rest of your day.